Hey everybody, and welcome to the second episode of The Nerd Umbrella. This time it's me, Yuchin, and Ray talking about one of our favorite books, Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. The discussion we had ran a little long. We didn't know we had this much to say, so we split it up into two. So if you liked the first half, we'll upload the next half next week. The audio quality on this one was a little low, and I'm sorry for that. We were working with 3 people on one mic, so it's a little distant, but I think it's still listenable, and I really enjoyed it, so I wanted to put this one up. And that's pretty much it from me. Let's get to it.
Nerd Umbrella, the wonderful podcast where we cover everything nerdy. And we've got a very special edition this time. It's going to be our first ever book review. And, we had never done something like this quite before, so we wanted to tackle something that we all just love, and it's just a book that I think is just, it's really a lot to talk about. So, I personally have a lot of ties to this book because this was the one that got me back into reading. So naturally, brought along the person who first recommended this book to me. The usual. It's you, Peter. It's you, Peter. Yes, it's Peter.
Hello.
And next, we also brought another special guest of ours who has read this book several times as well. Someone who needs no introduction, so we won't.
we won't
give her one. So now the book we're talking about. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm literally Ray from Star Wars.
There it is.
Yep.
Yeah, we are recording this one day after a Halloween party. So, literally Ray from Star Wars.
Ray. That'll be my name the whole podcast. Yeah. Literally Ray.
Literally Ray. And I am Stone. And we are going to be talking about The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss.
Woo.
Yeah. Again, thunderous applause. Thunderous, and just gotta go. So I thought one of the usual things we do when we are about to go over something, which I think is really interesting, is we read an overview. So for the movies that we've done, we go to like the Wikipedia page or the IMDb and just read like what they have to say, like what the pitch is to you.
Advertising.
Yeah, exactly. The weird thing is, I tried to do it for this book, and it's not really there. There's not really a blurb that aside from the thing that's on the back of the book.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to just figure out a way to just summarize it.
I know, and that's important when you're like trying to get new people to read it too. You're like, oh, this book, it's a fantasy book. You like fantasy books? Like, this is a good one.
It's about a guy telling other guy his story, that the guy had heard of. It's just,
I think Patrick Rothfuss put it in a really good way, where it's like the hero's journey from the perspective of the hero, after it all went down. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way.
It's hard to explain what the book is about.
Well, and if you've ever seen Pat Rothfuss give reviews on other books,
I've not.
He basically just says, "Yes, you have to read this book," and that's the only review that you'll get. So I think that he really appreciates a simplistic, straightforward approach to book reviews, which is probably why he doesn't encourage lavish praise, and he takes reviews from people like Ursula Le Guin, who not a lot of people would really expect to see doing a review on a different book, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, considering that we're actually lacking a, Wikipedia overview, I think the back of the book will probably be the best that we have to go for this. So, we talked about this earlier. Yeah, we'll just read the book from the back. This is now an audiobook. Reverse audiobook. We discussed this earlier, but my name is Quoth. Pretty sure that's what we decided is the correct way of saying it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know Yiddish at all. So, I've stolen princesses back from sleeping Barrow kings. I've burned down the town of Trebon.
Trebon.
I always say Trebon.
Trebon. Okay. I've spent the night with the Felurian and left with both my sanity and my life. I was expelled from the university at a younger age than most people are allowed in. I tread paths by moonlight and others fear to speak of during day. I have talked to gods, loved women, and written songs that make the minstrels weep. You may have heard of me. So begins a tale unequaled in fantasy literature. The story of a hero told in his own voice is a tale of sorrow, a tale of survival, a tale of one man's search for meaning in his universe, and how that search and the indomitable will that drove it gave birth to a legend. That's actually kind of interesting because I was looking on Patrick Rothfuss's website for Name of the Wind, and it is different on here.
What changed?
It says, so begins a tale, quoth,
Yeah.
from his childhood in a troupe of traveling players to years spent in a near feral orphan in a crime-riddled city, to his daring, brazen, yet successful bid to enter a difficult and dangerous school of magic. In these pages,
That's better. I like that one better.
I disagree. I don't like that one.
You don't like the kind of giving
No.
a specific one?
No, I think
that one sounds more exciting.
It casts it more into cliche fantasy literature, which I don't think this is. I think that this is very much, even more on the side of like science fiction, in terms of, yes, it uses magic, but it doesn't actually, it's not real magic. And so I think it gives you a false impression with that new.
But like one of the cool parts of the book is how like it kind of subverts the fantasy tropes a lot. Well, I mean, it plays some of them, but a lot of them are like, this would happen if it was a story,
Right.
but it's not a story. And you're like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Well, I can play to both of you here because there's actually a giant section before that section, which is like an expanse of the first section here. So it's the whole like my name is quoth, pronounced nearly the same as quoth,
Yeah, it's just the beginning of the book.
And it's like names. Yeah, it's literally the beginning where it talks about names, talks about all the names he's been given and why he's been given those, and like I think it seems
that first little bit.
it seems much more along that that kind of line. You were liking at least, but the second part of like
I love how it also accurately represents that Quoth is like a little bit of an asshole. Like you read that and you're like, yeah, all right, like you Pete, like come on.
It's the you may have heard of me line,
Yeah.
It's like he knows. He knows, and he's got to like
I think it works better in the book because everyone is so like telling stories about him and stuff. And so you kind of get that, like, he is a legendary character in the book, but when you take it out of context and just put the blurb on the back of the book, you're like, all right, come on, calm down a little bit.
I honestly can't even imagine what it would have been like to try and, like, summarize this book the way he had to, because it's just so much, And
the good things about the book are not simple things that are, like, easy to sum up.
Right. I mean, for instance, he says, I've spent the night with Felurian. If you're reading this, it's like, well, what is that? Who is that? Yeah. And you don't even find out until the second book, I think. So.
No, you don't. And I mean, the whole thing is that there's a lot of assumed things, They just put you right in the world and they assume you know what it is,
right.
They call it the university.
Yeah.
Not of anywhere, of anything.
Right.
They just assume.
The university.
Yeah. They assume you know the world as well as, just...
A person who's just in the world.
Yeah.
Who's living in it, yeah. And the world building is one of the, better parts. I really like the world in this book.
I do too,
and, like, the second book is also good because it explores more of the parts you don't even get to see. Because you only get to see, like, 3 or 4 parts of the world. 3 cities, I think.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
In this book, so...
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the big things I wanted to cover in our first initial non-spoiler section. For those people who have not read the book yet and, kind of want a little incentive to pick it up, here's... I don't think we've really got into really too... Yeah, I think we're fine. Yeah. But I think one of the biggest things I want to tackle first is the contrast to regular fantasy literature. We talked about that briefly, but like this, in my opinion, this book is like nothing I've read before in terms of fantasy. And my literature pool isn't nearly as big as both of you, which is why it's kind of nice having you two here. Cool. So I mean, my background is like I mentioned earlier, Dragonlance, some Lord of the Rings here and there. Mostly just The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was too young to handle the actual Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
A lot of the smaller like one-off books, but yeah, I'm curious to see what your background in fantasy is and how this differs from the usual thing you're used to.
Mm-hmm. I guess I can speak to. I think that it's fascinating specifically because it is a really unique writing style, and he writes a little bit more like a poet or a grand storyteller. And so I think that the author's voice that comes through in this book is sort of reminiscent of a court bard, which he refers back to with a couple of different characters throughout the course of this book. But even though he has this unique writing style, it's really interesting to know that Rothfuss loved The Last Unicorn. And I've read that book, and I've read The Innkeeper's Song, which is a sort of lesser known one by the same author. And it's just a very weird universe and very unique writing style that I think is reflected in Pat's writing also. And so even though he's got this very unusual way of telling this story, I think it's really cool to see how he's drawing on other fantasy literature. Like I saw a lot of I wrote down a bunch of them, a lot of Wheel of Time references that came through, especially with Telu and the Wheel and that sort of religious structure that they've got going on. The whole piece of iron and music, and that can be for later, but I think it's really unique that he manages to take a lot of these voices that are super popular in fantasy literature, but also give his own just very poetic, music-based voice to it, like he's telling a story or like he's trying to write a 14-minute ballad, basically, is sort of how that comes across to me.
It's really fun to read. It's weird it's hard to describe like what about it is fun, but like every time there's like a cool little thing that he does, you're like, oh yeah, I like that. It's really hard. It's one of my favorite books for that reason.
I agree, yeah.
And I can basically kind of just sit and read it for as long a time I have to read. Yeah,
that's usually how I describe it to people in terms of the writing style.
Yeah.
I say it is an easy book to read.
Yeah.
And when I say like that, I kind of relate it to young reading, but not in the sense that it's easy, like the words are simple,
Yeah.
it flows.
Because
like
he
kind of
does
like,
use longer, bigger words that not a lot of people use, but he describes them in the context of what it's being used for.
Exactly, yeah. And just the way you read it just flows so well,
It
and
does, yeah.
each thing just connects to each other perfectly. All the little details that you didn't really like think about, and it just really adds to the world itself.
Yeah.
And I think that was the biggest thing that made the book so easy to read. You know?
And easy to read again. Like
Right.
you kind of
I've read
pick,
this so many
you
times.
pick up like a bunch of stuff
Yeah.
upon multiple readings.
Let's just establish this. This is my second time reading this book. And how about you?
I think this is my fourth or fifth.
Yeah, I'll go like 5th or 6th.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
okay.
I forget so much
Yeah.
about it, and I realized so many new things as I was reading this, because I think the last time I read it was probably 1 to 2 years ago.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, same.
That was the big thing for me, is that like the first time I was reading, I was like, oh, so excited, like flip through the pages,
Yeah.
just want to know what happens next.
just
And
burned through, forgot everything.
Yeah.
pretty much. And the second time, like, you got to like, pick out some
Right.
more smaller details, some of the things I didn't think about, some of the smaller characters. And
That happened to me with the second book.
Yeah.
I read the
Oh,
second
yeah.
book in one sitting. Like I got it in the
Jeez.
Portland airport, got home, and then like missed my class the next day because I was just reading it.
That's awesome.
Jeez.
It's real, like you were saying, Eugen. I mean, it's so easy to do with these books, and especially when you think about it in the context of book 2. It's cool to go back and see all the different connections, and it's an easy book to reread multiple times.
Yeah, and I think another one of the big things that I think, maybe I could be wrong in my limited fantasy knowledge, but I think the magic system that they had
Mm-hmm.
seemed pretty different from what I was used to in terms of what I've read. Maybe you've read some other things that are kind of different, but
The one that comes to mind for me. So disclaimer: The Wheel of Time is my all-time favorite fantasy series, and probably actually just series in general. And so maybe I'm drawing things out of The Name of the Wind that aren't actually connected to The Wheel of Time, but I feel like I see it's it's a really popular, well-known fantasy series for people who are really serious about reading fantasy. And so I think there were a lot of references that I was seeing as I was reading, even if they were really subtle, like even the reference to music. And so when it comes to the magic in The Name of the Wind, I feel it's not the same as the magic in The Wheel of Time, but I felt like there was a relationship that I could see there, because the reason why I liked The Wheel of Time so much was because the magic system was so incredibly different from anything else I'd ever seen. And The Name of the Wind magic is very different from the magic that's in The Wheel of Time. They're not really that similar. But what I appreciated is that they took the time, Robert Jordan and Pat Rothfuss took the time to really explain how the magic works, and how, yes, it's magic, but we don't call it magic. For Wheel of Time, we call it channeling, and here they call it sympathy or naming, depending on, if you accept sympathy as magic. Yeah. So
I thought it's really interesting because there are kind of two kinds of magic that I think about, or I categorize in my head. It's magic that just works, and then magic that's explained. Another author who does the explaining magic is Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, I love Sanderson.
It's still magical, but there are like things like in the Mistborn books, you have to like eat iron to do stuff, and you like burn up iron in your stomach. And like in Stormlight, you have to have enough energy or whatever, and it works. And then there's like Tolkien magic, which is just like Gandalf put his staff at a thing, and it like goes, and it's really cool because you don't know how it works. Right. But it's used very sparingly. Like in the Lord of the Rings, Gandalf does magic like 5 times, and most of it is lighting staff so you can see. And I kind of don't like the like just magic as magic, and it's not explained
magic
as much.
For magic's sake.
And especially, this is my main gripe with the Harry Potter books, because magic in that is there's no like resources that you use. You just do it, and if you're good enough, you just do it. Yeah. But like people can do a lot of different things, and it's never really explained, and you just learn spells.
That's funny because I actually reread The Sorcerer's Stone last week because I got it. It was like free on Kindle Unlimited or something, and I was thinking about that too, where they mentioned that you have to use your wand, and maybe this was when she was still developing the world of Harry Potter. But I've always felt like there's some discrepancy where they say, you use the wand to do your magic. But there are some characters who just can do magic without the wand, and
it makes them cooler. Like Dumbledore can do it, and you're like, oh, that's so cool. But there's also no rhyme or reason to why.
Is it because he's so powerful, or has he worked with magic for a long time?
And that's the opposite in this book. Like every bit of magic that a person can do is directly tied to their skill of how good they are at it,
and
or
mental
their knowledge,
ability,
and how much they know about what they're doing, and that it makes it really satisfying.
That's absolutely what I loved about it as well. In that, like, usually you encounter magic in something, and you're like, oh, why can't I just do that?
Yeah.
And this, they have like logical explanations as to what they need to do in order to do this magic. Yeah. And it just sounds so excruciatingly difficult.
I don't know if I would have the patience.
Like,
right.
I'll pull up the first reference here, and we're in the non-spoiler section, but I don't think it's like really spoilery.
It's early in the books.
Yeah. But it's like it was when he was being taught how to play the game Seek the Stone. Yeah. You remember that one?
Yes.
Where he separates his mind into 2 different entities, right?
Yeah. He breaks his mind.
And then one of the minds hides the stone somewhere, and the other mind has to go find it.
Yeah.
And you just try to even wrap your head around trying to do that to yourself, and you're just like...
Like, that doesn't make...
Yuchen, is that how you got the name Yuchen Stone?
Yeah.
Really drawn to that passage.
Or the writing crop belief is what he calls it.
Alar.
The Alar. And
believing, so just to explain that, it's the belief that if you drop a rock, it will fall, and at the same time, it will not fall.
Yeah. And you have to believe both of those things at the same time.
Schrodinger's rock.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then, like, later in the book, I don't know if he does it in this book, but either in this book or the other book, he breaks his mind into, like, 3 or 4.
He does.
And you're just like,
something absurd.
What does that even... What are we even
what
doing
does that mean?
at this point? But it's one of those things that, like, if you accept that he can do that, and also that you can link things, then the rest of the magic just, like, makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like, it all follows the rules, which is, I think, really cool.
Mm-hmm. It's that kind of exceptional ability that really kind of brings him to life, I think.
Yeah.
I always appreciated, like, cool fantasy fighting scenes. It's not about, like, oh, he just swung his sword and chopped 5 people in half. Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, he just, like, nimbly, like, changed his grip and, like, threw this rope out. It had a very distinct thought process as to why they're doing it. And, like, the kind of, like, I guess the mental part of things is what really catches me with these sort of stuff. And I mean, I think that's why people like the magic in this so much, is because it's different, and it's understandable. You understand what they're trying to do and what they're doing and why it is an exceptional thing to do.
And just the attention to detail that Rothfuss has as he's writing the magic out is so absolutely incredible. And I feel like personally it's really unique, even for a fantasy series, that he does take the time to explain all of that and make it, again, it's an easy to read book. And I think that's because he takes the time to make this complicated magic system. He's at this university and whatever, but you can understand the rules of this universe even if you don't understand, complex physics or mathematics.
Yeah.
Maybe it's based in physics, but it's not, dependent on you, the reader, knowing advanced physics to understand this, which is cool.
Do you think there's a benefit that he starts out as a child in the story, so you kind of like walk along and learn that with him?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And he has like 2 or 3 like moments where he teaches a lesson in the classroom. You're like, oh, this is how you explain to the reader how this works. But I mean, it works. It all makes sense.
Well, I mean, I think that's as good of an overview as we can probably get in terms of just getting people to, if they're interested in the book, they'll probably, I think the magic, the world building, the language are probably some of the most key parts of the book. We're not even getting into story and characters at that point. But I think that's the big thing I wanted to say. I mean, I guess what would you specifically pitch to somebody if you were going to say like you should read this book? Like I'm really curious to specifically what your pitch is, because I know that's something I struggle with. I'm like, we talked about this briefly, but like, it's just a good book, just read it, and like,
just do it.
But how do you convince somebody,
I think for me, I would say that it's relatable. This is a book that you'll read and you will feel like you want to be in this world. Sort of like, I think when people read Harry Potter and they see the way that the characters interact with their world, that's why people want to, buy wands online and buy time turners and stuff. They want to interact with the world. And I think that if you do read this book, you will want to be a piece of this world and you'll want to learn more about it, which I think is so incredibly unique. And my overall love of this book is in the fact that the characters are human and they're flawed. Nobody is godlike. Nobody is a perfect Mary Sue or something that doesn't have issues. The main character has the most issues out of anybody in this entire book.
Yeah.
And I think that makes him really relatable to read from a first-person narrative, and also to see his sort of, there are these interludes along the book that sort of flash forward and back in time, and to see how he goes from being this really large figure to somebody who is sort of broken, and you're trying to find out what happened. I think that a lot of people can relate to that. So overall, I would just say that I think it's a relatable book, and I learned a lot about myself reading it.
Yeah. And it's been really interesting for me to see how I like different parts of the book as I've aged.
Yes.
I've read it like 5 or 6 times over 4 years now. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, I used to like this part, but now that part's really, or like this character is really dumb or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. My generic pitch is I just try to explain that it's like my favorite book. I'm like, this book is really good. If you like fantasy books, you'll like this book. I say it's relatable. The character's really good. The language is really good. And it's my favorite book. Read it. And then I buy a copy for them and throw it.
Yeah. Anytime I try to recommend it to people, I don't just, verbally recommend it. I go, oh, you would love this book, and I walk into my room and I give them my copy. Yeah.
Just pull out of your jacket. I'm so unprepared.
This is my 3rd copy of the book I've owned.
Really?
Yeah, because I give it to people and then they don't give it back.
That's a great recommendation.
He straps one to his belt. Just in an emergency, he has to lend one out. He's always got it prepared in order to recommend Name of the Wind to somebody. Yeah. So I definitely have heard a decent amount of stories of you loaning books and them getting lost or never getting back, which I guess seems to be a good testament to the book itself.
I think so.
Well, you mentioned earlier how it's a really cool journey from the first person perspective. And as we jump into the spoiler zone, that's something I think is actually really interesting, is the perspective. Mm-hmm. Because you are in this book in both a third and a second person narrative.
Right.
It gets a little because he switches into third, and then like as he's talking to the people in the bar, it like goes back.
Oh god, and especially in the sections when he starts to tell stories within the story that he's already telling.
It's like,
where are we?
Those parts are great.
Right, I love it.
But yeah,
it's definitely really interwoven like that. But I think it's really cool to think about the. This is one of the reasons we want to talk about this, but the potential of an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
This is the legend, right? And he is telling his story. Mm-hmm. And he's going to talk, he talks very, at the beginning, he's a Dimaru. That's how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to be doing this a lot because I have no clue, and linguistics is not my strong suit. But, they're known for storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone knows a good storyteller never tells the full truth. Because there's always got to be some embellishments here, some things to make, some flair. If you tell a story from front to back just as is, it's not the same.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder, what part is he telling true? What part is he omitting? What part is, what actually happened?
Mm-hmm.
And because he has that benefit of the doubt, being the legend itself, being the only person who knows what happened, he gets to say whatever he wants,
And I love that we are even having this discussion after Kvothe says, like, oh, I'm going to tell you all of the parts.
Right.
And you're like, but some of the
you
things
didn't.
are so crazy and or it just lines up so nicely that you're like, okay, this probably didn't happen exactly
Right.
like this, but
My counter to that is there's actually specifically the point where he first tries to describe Denna.
yeah, or he like just fucks up a lot.
No, it's not just he fucks up.
He's
He
like, she's
tells him.
perfect. Yeah.
He tells him to erase what he'd written.
Yeah.
He said you have to like cross
He
this out.
he
Oh,
rips the
yeah.
page
He
out.
rips the page, yeah. So that's I think the best example of saying, like, he's not quite as reliable as you'd expect him to be in
Yeah.
terms of the validity of the story.
Yeah, I hadn't really
Right.
thought about it like that, but that moment really does, like, he will put what he wants to on the page.
Maybe he didn't like his interpretation of the situation, but he specifically rips out the page because he did not like the way he was being portrayed.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that was my first real encounter, being like, this guy is actually not very reliable. You want to believe him
Yeah.
because it's amazing. It's a great story. He's
Right.
the protagonist, but you also have that seed of doubt in your mind, right?
Well, and especially if you consider it in the context of, he admits, and it seems like he's very proud of the fact that he creates these legends about himself. And he even says, some of the most famous legends about me, I created. I was the person who started this. And there's all of these, scenarios of him intentionally spreading rumors. Like at the very beginning, he talks about somebody, I think it was that some drunk person came into the inn in the flash forward, and he recognized him, and obviously Voss freaks out, and he starts spreading this myth of like, oh, this is how I got the inn, and this is how I ended up in this town, and I've always lived here, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that even just recognizing that, because he is a powerful storyteller, he admits that he has created the majority of the things that he's famous for doing. And so even if he's telling the exact truth about what happened, it still shows that he's not like a trustworthy sort of narrator, because if you make up a myth about yourself, then you're gonna, even if you did a bad job of it in the beginning, if you're retelling it, you're probably gonna
Make it better.
Exactly, and be like, oh, I should have done this at the time, and enhance on that, I guess.
I think it's kind of crazy because you do see in his interludes in the present day of him, he has a lot of moments where he's just very human, and he just really, he definitely tries to put on a different front than he is. Bast talks about how it used to be just a front for him, a facade. It was he would still always be the old person he was. And then there's other times where I think one of the first interludes after he makes Bast and the chronicler make up, he goes out, gets some wood, and then that's where he just starts crying, because it's after he talked about his parents' death.
Yeah.
And that's he didn't want to show that in front of the people he's telling the story to, because he's got to stay strong. Like, sure, he was emotional when he's telling the story, but like, there's still parts of him he doesn't want people to see.
Yeah. He really, I mean, in the entire book, he doesn't like showing weakness at all for any reason. So, like, he'll go out back to cry. And in the book, like, or in the story, he'll take the now route to not bleed and, like, make up all these stories about why it was, and just act really cool about being whipped and stuff. So, yeah. And I think he learned that in Terbian. Like, the first time when he got beat up by bullies, you gotta act tough or whatever.
Right.
And so that's like a learned over the course of the rest of the story, and also the flash forwards too.
And actually, now that you mention it, I don't see how somebody could be a straightforward, trusting person when he lived, I think for 3 years, he was in that city, and you learn to protect yourself. And I don't think that you can do that by being honest all the time.
Yeah. And it's not like a switch you just get to, he just turns it off when he goes to the university.
Right. Because if anything, his life's almost harder when he gets there.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of crazy because, I think it's stuff like that are like little things that really reinforce the storytelling. because just like I said, some of the little details you wouldn't initially think about really creep up on you. You know, it just really weaves it together. You know, so the kind of idea of like needing to stay strong in the face of controversy, confrontation, difficulties, stuff like that. And you know, it's kind of, it tends to his stubbornness, and kind of tends to, it's consistent throughout as he moves along, that he always tries to put on a face when something hard happens. You know, when it comes to talking to Denna, when it comes to encountering situations with Ambrose, like, you know, a lot of people talked about how, you know, his friends, Simon and what's the other guy's
Willem.
Willem, that's it, yeah. How they would they said, you know, if you just let this blow over, you know. But the fact that he would not just take an insult and just, like, you know,
be okay with it.
Be okay with it. He always had to bite back,
right?
Because that's what he had learned as a kid living in Tarbean. So, and it's like I said, it's those little details that really just weave the character to be more real. I think. And
sort of like uncovering the man under the myth.
Exactly, yeah.
He's the legend, and trying to figure out, well, you know, he was just a scared little boy for a really long time,
and I think that's exactly that's the perspective of Chronicler in the book. Like, he's heard the stories and he's here, and Kvothe is still telling him the story, but the fact that we're like going one level deeper, like Chronicler wants to know Kvothe's story, but we want to know like behind Kvothe's story. I don't know.
Right.
It's interesting to think about.
Right, exactly. I actually wrote this down at one point when he's starting to tell his story to Chronicler in the very beginning. He says, the best lies about me are the ones that I told.
Yeah.
So he really fabricated his own character, and so I love that, the idea of a non-trustworthy storyteller.
I think we'll bring up a lot more of them as we move along, but just kind of the little phrases, little paragraphs, or little just traits about him that just make him, as you mentioned Ray earlier, about him just being a relatable character. Despite the fact that he is a legend in this world, and he is just greater than life, he is still like a normal person, and he still is relatable to all of us, you know, going through lots of different struggles and stuff like that. One thing I actually wanted to highlight was probably one of my favorite passages. And I don't think I've heard death quite described this way before, but, you know, it's initially when he first gets back to his camp after the massacre happens, and everyone, his family, his troop, they're all dead.
Yeah.
And it's the idea that he is just numb, right? And that's pretty normal, right? He's numb as he's seeing all his friends dead and killed. But it's the fact that as he passes by one of his dead friends, he sees a kettle that's cooking potatoes.
Yeah.
And in his mind, that's normal. So he goes over there in the middle of this burning, just massacred
decimated camp,
and he finishes cooking the potatoes.
Yeah.
And like that's just something that, you know, you don't think about it, but in the shock of that kind of moment, you know, your mind would probably want to grasp at the most normal thing that there is. And, you know, that's not a detail I don't think I've personally ever seen before in terms of like dealing with that kind of situation, which is why I really appreciated that, and it really just kind of brought him out more to me as just like, no, this is not a person who's like, here's trouble, I'm gonna rush in with my sword and just kill everybody, you know. So it's he's a person, you know.
And I appreciated that it took him so long to make that connection about the Chandrian, like way later in the book. Yeah. And he even says, you know, well, to you, reader, this probably seems pretty obvious, but you have to remember that at the time, I had blocked that part of my life out of my mind, and I hadn't thought about it in years, you know. And he was so just numb and horrified, and he had a really hard time dealing with that kind of stuff. And so the first time he actually has to deal with any of that, I think, is when Scarpi comes to Tarbean and tells the story, and then he starts thinking about his parents and his father, and I think he mentions that it's like a small wound, but when he finally touched it, it didn't hurt as bad as he was expecting.
Yeah, because it was like 3 years later.
Yeah. But it still hurts, you know. And it's I appreciate that, absolutely. And especially since the tragedies in his life play such a huge role in the overall story, and also just in the development of his character. I think that I appreciate the way that was navigated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of I'm gonna keep going back to the writing style because that's where it is for me.
Right.
And I think it's the fact that he's used to hearing all the legends, and he's very self-aware of it. And when I say he, I don't even know if I'm talking about Quoth or Patrick Rothfuss at this point, because it's kind of both. There's a lot of moments where they actually reference what is cliche legends, and some of it happens in this book, but they also address some of them, and they just say this isn't some legend or some story that you've heard, and this is real life. And I think that kind of tongue-in-cheek self-awareness kind of plays along a lot with the kind of subtle humor that it really exists in this book. You wouldn't describe this book as a comedy, but there's a lot of wit.
Yeah,
a lot of witty. Yeah, it's very witty, I think. And I don't specifically remember the page I was thinking about when he's making fun of him, myths and stories and being self-aware. But some of the things were every time, for instance, the university, I think, is one of the places I like to start. Is that every time he makes a huge advancement, he is heavily punished for it.
Yeah.
Right.
He gets advanced to the, he's going to get whipped, but also he's promoted to the next level,
Yeah.
And I just think that's, it's kind of crazy, I really like that idea that, he's special, sure, but he doesn't get the free pass because he's special.
Right. Maybe he's incredibly smart, but he's also just not, he just can't figure it out. He keeps trying to sneak into the archives instead of just being patient and being a normal student. And for him, it's always this sense of life or death, basically, if I have to get money or I'm leaving the university this term. Okay, I'm here for the next term. Good, I figured that out. But now I have to do this or I'll get kicked out of the university again, and
exactly.
There's never a moment of rest, really, that I can think of until maybe the end of the second book, which is way later down the line.
Yeah, it's not a state of constant panic, but at least there's always one big objective that's looming over him, that if it doesn't work, the story's just over.
Right.
He just goes home.
And again, I think we're going to keep coming back to the writing style because it really is almost its own character, I think, in a lot of ways in the book. But I just love that sense of panic that I have the entire time that I'm reading the book, and there's, I think the moment that stood out for me is he's playing for his talent pipes. And my heart was racing.
That's my favorite part.
I couldn't believe that I actually emotionally engaged with it and that I was nervous. And I was like, oh no, his string broke on his lute and he's totally, screwed right now. And I just think that's really, really special in that sense of he's panicked, I'm panicked, everybody's freaking out.
You really feel for him,
Yeah. Anything
he goes through, you really feel for him in terms of his triumphs, his struggles, his sadnesses. Don't think that's a word, but you feel when he feels sad, the way he describes it and the way things happen, it just generally feels like a tragedy for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you definitely cannot say he had an easy life. And whenever he does succeed, it is a classic hero in that you want to cheer for him. You want him to succeed. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he also it is the hero's journey. He has his flaws, and that's what gets him in trouble. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is that I don't think there's any specific thing that gets him in trouble all the time. It's many different facets of him.
Right.
And I think there are different characters that bring out those specific flaws. Denna and Ambrose come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think his time at the university. The university system itself comes to mind.
Right, especially the masters.
The masters.
The way that they sort of goad him a lot of the times.
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting in the sense that, I don't know, the character development, I don't really know how to describe it because he definitely develops quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But in some areas he just stays, true to himself, stubborn.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to change this, and
stubborn and overconfident.
Yeah. And you can't blame him because he's I think 14, 15 at this point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, as good as you're gonna get at that kind of age.
Yeah.
But as we mentioned earlier, he's kind of ingrained with these habits that he learned to survive with as a kid. That he has to hold on to this feeling for survival. So, it's kind of interesting to think about. what I mean, I'm trying to think of the areas specifically now where I think he really developed as a character.
Oh, I was thinking of this as you were speaking. I think the moment that, you know, he tries, I think that he's intentionally trying to turn himself into a hero in some ways.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, he doesn't want, you know, the hero's burden, but he does, you know, he creates these legends about himself. But I think it was such a powerful moment when he saves, was it Fela that he saves from the fire in the laboratory? I think that was the first moment that he actually was a hero. And I think you can see after that moment in the story that he starts to develop a little bit more of a hero complex, but also just a desire to want to try and actually save people instead of creating myths about himself or, you know, trying to create himself into a hero in the story. He becomes less story oriented, I think, and a little bit more focused on actually being a hero, which he does at the very end, you know, when they're trying to kill the Dracus. He saves an entire town. Granted, he also burns it to the ground, but yeah.
Well, first of all, that rescue scene was probably one of my favorites because it's just so freaking cool.
Yeah.
Like the stuff that he does, and like that's the part where I think he splits his mind into three.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I'm glad you brought up the Dracus part, because I think I specifically remember at the end of it when he's like comforting the child, gives her like the random medallion.
Right.
Yeah. I think he says that's the first time he
That's
ever
right.
truly felt like he was being a hero.
Right.
You know, despite, you know, killing a Dracus and like, you know, saving Fela from like this explosion of fire and all this sort of stuff. When he comforts a girl and helps her sleep at night, you know, that's the moment he feels like he's truly been a hero.
Strong.
And even that comes back to bite him in the next book. Because they like try to invent. We can.
I just don't remember. I haven't
like
reread that.
The masters investigate him for doing magic they shouldn't be doing.
Oh, that's
because
right.
He gives the
Right.
medallion
Yeah,
to her.
because I get.
She believes that it
that's right.
wards away ghosts or whatever.
Yeah, and they're worried about people burning. That's the other
yeah.
cool thing, is that even though they're doing incredible things at the university and they're creating items like lamps and random things that people are using in every town.
You can have windows now.
Right.
Like, great.
But people there's still that constant fear that if anybody at the university puts a toe out of line, the general civilization will start to burn them again, you know, and like for witches or something.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's something I definitely recognize more the second read through for me, is just how much disdain I had for the university in general.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to like it. I wanted to be my Hogwarts.
Right.
You know?
Yeah,
but
it's not Hogwarts.
It's not even close, you know? And it's just because
it's not Hogwarts in that everything is not all right all the time. Like Hogwarts was always for Harry like the place he went to and then it was cool. Like that was the good place. And the university is a place he's trying to stay in.
Right.
But there are people running the university who are dicks. So
Yeah, and it's like Harry and Quoth were both, their stories were working their way towards going to Hogwarts University, you know. But for both of them, when they get there, it has totally different consequences. Where, you know, in The Name of the Wind, he's always worried about being kicked out, and it's not a place of safety. He goes there trying to find the archive so that he can just learn more about what the heck happened to his parents and to his whole troop, and the second he gets there, he's kicked out of it. So it's like it's
first he gets told that his cause is dumb and childish, and then he gets kicked out.
that scene still always makes me just.
I like
cringy.
Legitimately skipped it when
really did you really?
Yeah, I just like didn't read it. I was like, all right, I'll just go until he's kicked out.
I hate knowing what's about to happen when I'm rereading it, and just being like, oh man.
I mean, actually, that scene specifically makes me so excited for the TV show coming out.
Yeah,
that's right.
Just because I just imagine him walking through like the you know the archives with this candle, and then just out of the dark, just face comes out, just Lauren just furrowed in anger, and just like that, just like legitimately like just kind of scares me a little bit, and like that's gonna be good. That's man. I can't believe you skipped it though.
I like legitimately did not read it.
Wow. Okay. Were there any other parts that you skipped, or just that one?
No, that was the only part.
Well, the first chapter, the second chapter.
I just didn't read it.
I didn't read it.
I read the overview.
It's Spark Notes summary.
Yeah. Is there a Spark Notes for this book?
Probably.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it gets taught in classes though.
That's a good point.
Well, I guess
Anyway.
That's fair.
Should be.
Yeah, I think.
I don't know if we're quite at that level yet.
Yeah.
Fantasy just straight up fantasy, I don't think that's really.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's just not appreciated the way that I feel like it should be as a genre. If you want to learn about literature, I think, of course, there's value in reading old classics, but really, there are so many modern pieces that have come out, like The Name of the Wind, that the writing style can teach you so much about English in general. I think that it should be taught in lit classes, and it's very creative.
Yeah. I think it would get people into reading more,
Yeah.
too, but...
I think actually, speaking on the subject of English is my worst subject by far. I'm awful at it, but I think so it's kind of what makes it so cool for me as an innocent reader to understand what are the things that really draw me in to some storytelling. And I think one of the bigger things was we briefly touched it earlier, but it's the idea that their world is just the way it is, and they just assume you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, well, for instance, the way they measure time in terms of, like, I think a span.
Oh yeah.
Like some of the little things they do, like they spit for good luck.
Yeah, all the super little details.
It's little details, and they
don't... the road to Tinue.
They don't explain it to you.
Yeah.
They just
Telu anyway.
yeah, they just do it.
Yeah.
And they just assume you're along for the ride. And I've seen some places do that, like here's some language, and then you're like, okay, just drop a word in here every once in a while, and like, okay, that means fuck in this language.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then there's other times you're like, okay, yeah, here's like our little ritual and stuff like that. But this one just felt natural because like again, I just feel like I'm like one of the Joe Schmoes in the bar just listening to a story because it's like you know how the world works already.
Right. Why would anybody explain it to you?
Exactly. Yeah. So I like that it was like that, but it was also concise in the fact that it wasn't confusing. You're like, wait, what are they doing this for? What's this? Oh.
And go for it. I just think I love learning about the world. Like the stories that they tell about the background and the culture stuff are like among my favorite parts because you get to. It's like someone's actually explaining it to you, so you go, oh, okay. Right. So but they're so few and far between. I think there are like 3 in this book. Mm-hmm. There are 2 more in the sequel, I think, that are like kind of important on how the world was made or what the fairies are and stuff like that. But yeah, so learning about the world through the stories that people tell is also. I mean, that's how we're all learning about it, anyways.
Right. I think it's really interesting that really, you could say that there are a lot of main villains in this story, but really it's about the Chandrian. Yeah. And they're not explained to you at all. And because the main character doesn't know. Yeah. And I think that that's so incredibly unique that you're along for the ride. You're trying to find
every little drip of new knowledge you get, you're like, oh, this is super
exactly.
cool.
And you're like theorizing about it alongside with him.
Yeah, and it's those stories because they're just giving you a touch of the Chandrian, which is kind of cool because he has that first encounter as a kid, the later encounter as he's investigating later, and it's kind of, I don't think I've ever had this much like build up to a main villain.
Yeah,
right.
Like we haven't seen hardly any of them.
We haven't even seen them. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. I mean they show up, but what I'm saying is that they're not like a constant. It's not like Voldemort in every single. We keep coming back to Harry Potter because it's easy to compare it, but. Voldemort is in every single book in some way or another. And even though the Chandrian come up, we don't actually like encounter them quite as often as a normal villain that we normally would do,
Mm-hmm. You encounter them like once at the beginning and once at the end, basically.
I mean, even in those situations, usually you know who the villain is because it's the evil empire over there or just the evil wizard or something like that. And
because that's what the constant struggle is.
They at least talk about it, right? And like the only setup we've had so far is the very start of the beginning. We have Scarpy's story where you learn about who he is and why he became that way. Maybe.
Yeah.
They have the same name at least, though, so it's a possibility. Mm-hmm. And then, the investigation he has at the end, which ultimately leads to nothing, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
But they do find he learns about the pot that has the drawings on it.
Yeah. So like those are just like it's really, really setting up. It's kind of interesting because it almost feels like the story's not about it at all. Mm-hmm. It really is in the end just about him.
Yeah.
And while it's building up maybe toward, I'm actually at the point. I'm actually at the point where I don't even think it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like maybe they'll just never explain it, and you're just left to be like, well, nobody in this universe knows. Nobody believes in the Chandrian, and so nobody knows about anything in this universe Why should you, reader? Goodbye. And
Well,
then you're just left.
It's kind of like the Big Lebowski to me in a sense. You know, there's all these crazy things happening in this world and like all these like other subplots and whatever. But in the end, it's just about this person, you know, and about their life. And you know,
that's gonna piss me off.
That's gonna piss
that's
you off.
that's how it works.
you know, just no conclusion at all to any of the stories. So
Well, I mean, there'll be a conclusion. We have to get back to the inn at some point.
do we?
I feel like we do, right? Or he has to. I don't think we have to get like, and then I started an inn, and that's the end of the book.
Right.
But like, we have to get to something that breaks the world a little bit, because like the world's
Right.
going to shit when he's
Right.
telling the story.
And speaking of that, I'm hoping that what I would love, and this is just more, you know, wishful thinking, but I
Yeah.
really want there to be a fourth book that takes place after the story
I
ends.
know.
Where it's just his modern day, because he's got all of these issues
Yeah.
in the modern day world of the story. where
And are we
he
going to
can't
get the
do
end to
sympathy.
that?
Right. I'm kind of feeling like we won't.
Yeah.
You know, I think he'll
We don't-
finish his story and Chronicler will
Pack
die
up
and
his
that's just the
bags.
end. He'll disappear again.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope not.
I think that's what's really building the hype because there's just so much left, you
Mhm.
know, and it all feels like it can get wrapped up.
But he hasn't even become the king killer yet.
No,
and that's what it's the King Killer
And
Chronicles.
Yeah, exactly. And who's the king?
Who is
we
the
don't even know
king?
the
We have
king
no-
who he's
exactly.
gonna kill. Oh.
It's the
Gonna
crazy
be
thing
nice.
because like I don't know. For instance, I was a really big Aragorn fan when I was a kid,
Me too.
and I remember I was waiting. I think it was Brissinger's the third one, right?
Aragorn. You said Aragorn.
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 I'm also a big Aragorn fan, but
Fine. All right.
anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
Aragorn.
Aragon.
I figures the one thing I actually mess up on
So it's
pronunciation.
the one you actually know.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, Aragon. The third one's Brissinger, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I remember reading Brissinger, and then I was like hyped for the fourth book for a while, but then the longer it stewed over,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like,
The Game of Thrones effect.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
there's so many issues. Like,
Yeah.
Well, but he started it when he was so young. Too.
I don't blame him at all. But you know, this is kind of the contrast I'm having with this. Is that like, for that, I'm just like, how are you going to possibly wrap this up? You can't wrap this up. You just opened up these new things here at this very end, and like, there's no conclusion in sight. You know, versus this, it's like, it's kind of what I associate with anime. Actually, is a power level effect. You know how it's got to end, right? There's at least a semblance of where it needs to, you know, the ending's going to be, the last little bit's going to be, because you know, for instance, you know, he's going to lose his like amazing cloak, I think it was.
Yeah.
He's got that black sword, something. You know, these are all these little pieces that you know have
He
got to
doesn't
be
sing
there.
music for some reason now.
Right.
Yeah.
He
like,
can't do sympathy.
Yeah.
Which
or
is
like he
fascinating
can,
to
but
me.
like very badly. Yeah.
Which is so.
So there's an expectation of what the end looks like, at least. So
Well,
it
because
all
we've been shown the end
exactly
at the beginning.
and that's why it feels for me it's so hyped, because like I just want to know how these all connect.
yeah. Right.
You know, all the pieces are there,
Mhm.
and like, he literally established them already. Unless he just for some reason forgets, which isn't really his style.
Right.
It's all going to
But
be in there somehow.
The thing is how he wrote the book. He wrote the book when he was in college, I think, and he wrote it
Did
as
he?
one book,
Huh.
one big book.
Mhm.
So that's why I have a little faith that the ending will be good, or
Mhm.
like it'll all wrap up, because I think he knew kind of how it was going to end. Maybe some details will change, or like even big things, but I feel like he knows that it's going to end at some point, and he's
Mhm.
also stated like there are only going to be 3 books. Like,
I don't know. I'm holding out for a Wheel of Time. Like,
No,
I think
no,
it was
he-
supposed to be 3 books, and it's
he's-
14.
He said that there are going to be other books in the world,
That's right,
but
yeah.
not specifically about those, which I'm in for too. But
Sure, yeah. I would absolutely buy him and read him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of characters to explore,
and places
Yeah.
like in Modeg, where I think Willem is from, or Simon, one of them is from Modeg.
I think it's
Willem, I
Willem.
believe.
yeah.
Yeah.
He said that Quoth doesn't really go to Modeg.
Right.
And
This
so we're just
whole
never
area to
this
explore,
whole
yeah.
culture that he kind of like drops little
Right.
hints of, and we're just never going to see it. in
I
the
would
books.
love to have a history book,
Yeah.
to be honest. Like, or something from...
That's what you're trying to learn through book 3. It's just
Mhm.
like a history book,
Right.
or like a timeline or something.
Yeah.
So that's the end of the first hour of our discussion on Name of the Wind. If you liked it, be sure to check in next Wednesday when we upload the second half. Go ahead and give us a follow on Twitter at The Nerd Umbrella and subscribe on iTunes. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.